This program is a paid commercial announcement from Jacob Media Partners and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program is pre-recorded.
Jacob Media Partners presents The Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Presented by the law offices of Adam Malamut and Associates. Powered by InjuredWorkers.com. And driven by Jaguar Land Rover Westchester. Now, live from the Malamut and Associate Law Studios, The Adam Malamut Show. Hosted by Adam Malamut.
And a good evening, everyone, and welcome in on a Saturday night here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinions. Right here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT.
Thanks, Krause. Before we get started, I want to thank our guests today, Bryan Turner, Damon Pennington, and Keith Gentes. For our listeners, George Floyd was a 46-year-old father. He had a 6-year-old daughter, Gianna. He was a son. He was referred to as favorite friend and cousin. He was a truck driver who had moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota from Houston, Texas a few years back to not just secure jobs, but to become a better father to his daughter. He worked in security at Conga Latina Bistro. He was a truck driver. He worked security as a third job at local Salvation Army in Minneapolis. He went to Minneapolis to better his life, and he died as a result of excessive force and violence by a Minneapolis police officer. Michael Brown, on August 9th, 2014, was killed by a Ferguson police officer who had shot Michael Brown as he was fleeing the scene of a shoplifting. He was fleeing the scene, and he was shot and killed. Freddie Gray, on April 12th, 2016, was accused of carrying an illegal switchblade knife. The prosecutor later determined it was a legal knife. Freddie was arrested, denied his inhaler, handcuffed, placed in the wagon, face down on his stomach, unable to breathe. He was not restrained by a seatbelt. He repeatedly asked for medical attention and was denied. He fell into a coma as a result of the injuries he sustained after being put in the wagon, face down, handcuffed, unable to breathe. After falling into the coma, he died a couple days later. Eric Garner was 43 years old and was filmed while being tackled to the ground by New York City police. He repeatedly gasped, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe," while officers put him in a chokehold. He died an hour later. Tamir Rice was 12 years old. 12 years old. He was killed by two officers in Cleveland in November of 2014. Police responded to a 911 caller who said that there was a juvenile that had a gun that was pointing it at somebody else, but the gun was probably fake. The 911 caller indicated that the gun was believed to probably be fake. The police arrived. They shot 12-year-old Tamir Rice and then waited 4 minutes to even provide assistance. 4 minutes is a lifetime. 4 minutes to provide assistance. Walter Scott was 50 years old on April 4th, 2015, when he was stopped in North Charleston, South Carolina, for a non-functioning third brake light. A brake light. That's what stopped him. A brake light. After questioning, Mr. Scott got out of the car, fearful for the way things were going with the police officer, and just attempted to run away. He feared for his life. He feared that his line of questioning for being pulled over for a non-working third brake light put his life in danger, and he was right. And as he's running away, the officer cowardly shot him in the back and killed him. A third brake light. Brianna Taylor was a 26-year-old African-American EMT. She was a first responder. She was killed by Louisville Metro Police after they forced entry into her apartment searching for two people who were already in police custody. Brianna's boyfriend, believing that the police were intruders who lawfully owned a weapon, protecting his girlfriend and where they lived, opened fire. Brianna was killed by the officers. These officers murdered Brianna Taylor. Tanisha Anderson, Yvette Smith, Miriam Carey, Shelley Fry, Darnisha Harris, Melise Williams, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis, Rakia Boyd, Sharice Francis, Aim Stanley Jones, Tanika Wilson, Katherine Johnston, Alberta Sproul, Kendra James. These are 15 women whose names you very well may not know, but every single one of them died as a result of an encounter with police. An encounter that otherwise could have been peaceful, but was not. You need to know these people's names. And Katherine Johnston, for you listening, Katherine Johnston was 92 years old. 92 years old when the police in Atlanta, in a botched, no-knock drug raid, entered her house and killed her. She made it through 92 years. She made it through World War II. She made it through Vietnam. She made it through the Korean War. She made it through the Depression. She made it through a number of other social and political struggles in our country. And she was killed by the Atlanta Police Department during a no-knock drug raid. I opened up the show talking about George Floyd. Community cannot happen without unity. Think about that. Community cannot happen without unity. For those disillusioned that racism died with desegregation, that is not the case. That is false. Racism in America may have been less popular to voice, but for some reason, now it's as popular as ever. There are instances we'll talk about during the show today of blatant racism and the way it has been disregarded up until now. We have to take action for change. If we don't take action, change won't occur. If you are not a part of the solution, you are part of the problem. We're going to hear from our guests when we return. This show is about community. It's about unity. It's about systemic racism. It's about how we're going to affect change. When we return, we'll hear from our guests, Bryan Turner, Damon Pennington, and Keith Gentes.
The main thing is conversation, right? I mean,
right. So are you going to take this back to your superior?
This is my favorite thing about this job, is talking to people and helping people. That's why we do this job, you know what I'm saying?
And back here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, a reminder for our listening audience, you can connect with Adam Malamut on social media. You'll find him on Instagram at attorney_Adam_Malamut. That's at attorney_Adam Malamut, part one of a two-part series. This is the Adam Malamut Show. Adam, all yours.
Thanks, Krause. So our first segment, I wanted to lay out there the names of people that have to continue to be spoken. Without speaking their names, we will not affect change. Now it's time to speak the names of our guests. So Damon Pennington is with us. Bryan Turner is with us. Keith Gentes will be joining us during the next segment. Damon, why does this movement matter?
Give you an ironic story. My wife, a couple of days ago, asked me, she said, Damon, how does this affect you? And I said, for the first time, over the last 30 years from Rodney King, there's been situations where we'll riot in Los Angeles, and then a week later, there'll be devastation and it'll be over. We'll riot in Ferguson and it'll be over. But for the first time, I looked at CNN the other day, and it was like a Zoom call with 40 cities going on at the same time. And you look at the faces that are protesting, and it was all different races, all different creeds. And for the first time, people started to get it. And I've had friends, I've had colleagues, I've had family members that have received emails from executives of managers saying, not that they stand with you, but they sort of understand for the first time. And they're asking for, is there something I can read? Is there something I can watch? Now, obviously, you can say, you can go watch Roots, but that's at least the catalyst for sometimes for people just starting to learn or want to understand. Because for so long, people are saying, I just don't get it. I don't know what you're going through. But for the first time, people want to understand. And it's definitely a difference. And I'm starting to realize that it's definitely a different day. It's definitely a different day.
So, Damon, I certainly know what you do and who you are. But for the listening audience, share a little bit about you and who you are.
Born and raised in a small town in Indiana called Gary, Indiana. One of the most segregated cities in America for a number of years. I do business in Camden, which is ironic because Camden reminds me so much of where I grew up. And I've been in defense contracting for a number of years, government and defense contracting, and it's sort of piggybacked that into development. I've done a lot of development in Camden, and I'm just a serial entrepreneur, as I like to say. I own a number of different businesses, and that's just been me. I'm a people person, as you will learn maybe 50 minutes into the segment. I like to talk, and I'm definitely a people person.
So, you mentioned Gary, Indiana.
Right.
That's where Michael Jackson's from.
Exactly.
So it's not such a small town. It may be a small town in terms of population.
Yeah, and if you're a Broadway fan, you know the song Gary, Indiana, Gary, Indiana.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Brian.
Yes.
Tell the folks who you are.
My name is Bryan Turner. Born and raised in Camden City. I'm a defense attorney. Right now, I served a stint on the Camden City School Board. I now live in Cinnaminson, New Jersey. I am currently in the mix of creating an organization which is in and of itself birthed by some of the actions that we've seen recently with respect to minority communities and police involvement. But my main focus is to address those issues and educate minority populations and populations outside of those populations as to why certain things happen and what we need to do to affect that change.
And I applaud Brian's humility, but Brian's also a fellow Rutgers Camden alum, and you hold some distinction there, having been inducted into the South Jersey Basketball Hall of Fame.
That is correct.
All right. Well, for our firm league, we're going to you're in, man. You're in. All right. I just want to make sure we lock you up. First-round draft pick.
Locked in.
Brian, what does the movement mean to you right now?
What it means is that people are finally, as Damon said, starting to get it. This has been going on for as long as I can remember. What's happening now is with the introduction of cell phone technology and video technology, you're able to actually see what minority communities have been dealing with for a very, very long time. And it is being pushed upon those people who have not seen it, who do not understand it, and it is making them feel uncomfortable. And that uncomfortable nature, that uncomfortable seat, is why we're seeing such a push to change what is happening. The only way that you're going to affect real change is to put individuals in an uncomfortable position. You won't affect any type of change without them being in a position that they were not in before.
So you talk about change. What's change?
Here's change. For me specifically, change would be, in my practice, identifying certain parts of a criminal statute that are unevenly addressed in the court system. I have several specific examples, but one in particular would be enhanced sentencing for certain types of offenses. They're going to disparately affect minority individuals because of their placement in the system. And affecting change in this manner is, quite frankly, you have to smack the legislature in the face. You have to say, listen, this is the problem, and this is how we can address it. I've mapped out this language. I think this language should be introduced. I think we need to mold this into the statute so we can start to reduce the problem. As we were speaking earlier, we were talking about protesting and marching and speaking without any real action. I am all for the protests. I am all for the marches. But what we need is we actually need those feet on the ground to take this change to where it needs to go. It just can't be a situation where we're talking in groups without any real form or any real plan of action. Certain things you can do with respect to the police departments. You can have the police departments review their force policies. You can have the police departments allow civilian review boards to actually make sense. You can allow the police departments to allow their IA boards more transparency. Because what essentially is happening specifically with the police brutality is that because it's not punished, it's like a little kid in school. Let's say little Johnny. Little Johnny goes to school and the principal says, I'm going to tell your parents that you were bad today. And little Johnny scoffs and he says, that's okay. I'll call him and tell him myself. Because little Johnny doesn't fear reprisal. It's essentially what's happening with the police departments across America. There is no fear of reprisal for their action.
Damon, beyond the legislators, where else can change occur?
Well, I think I'm going to piggyback sort of what Brian's saying. Obviously, we both have a lot of relationship with Camden. And 4 years ago when the police department sort of changed, and obviously we see on television about defunding police departments, and I think that's been taken out of context, the word defund, but I think modifying and reforming how the police departments are run. And one of the things I noticed, I know when it was a bad mark on Camden when they originally did it, but you notice how it's become a big part about community policing. That's been really important. And the crime is going down a lot in Camden, and I think sometimes it's not about having. I think they have a tank, not in Voorhees, but some of these police departments have a lot more things that they don't necessarily have, and sometimes it puts people in fear. I think Camden's come through, and it's been getting a lot of national press of what they've done over the past 4 years, and I think sometimes it's not about being the big bad police department, but sometimes it's about community reform. And I laughed in the beginning when they're having barbecues and inviting the community over for barbecues and getting to know the police officers, but it's worked. And now with all this happening throughout the country, Camden's looking like they did the right thing.
You know, it comes down to community policing, right? So people have to figure out what that means. The police departments are well-intentioned in bringing the police into the community. It's the product that they bring out of the community that they need to work more on. So as the police are having the barbecues, or Camden did an exceptional job with walking with peaceful protesters, which I thought was a great olive branch. Right. But it's so much more than that. It's regaining trust. It's allowing first responders to be looked at as people who are an asset to the community, not people who, like some of the names that we had mentioned, have to be afraid of the community. You have an individual like Walter Scott, who in South Carolina got pulled over for a third brake light, and this poor guy got shot in the back running because he was afraid. Right. And we all know people who have been affected. Brian, my practice has been just like yours for 20 years. But we know what we need. We just need to get to how we get that product out of community policing. We're going to take a break. Yeah. When we come back from the break, I want to continue this discussion. Keith Gentes is going to jump in and corporate responsibility. An incident happened in South Jersey this past week. Keith's going to talk about that. We'll be back in a minute.
I think we're finally getting justice. The Black Lives Matter movement has been a movement for 6 years, but it took the death of George Floyd to finally get attention.
From the Malamut and Associates Law Studios, this is the Adam Malamut Show.
And back here on Talk Radio 1210 WPHT, this is the Adam Malamut Show. Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Connect with Adam on Twitter at Adam S. Malamut ESQ. At Adam S. Malamut ESQ. Adam, we've done a lot of radio programming over the last 19 months. This part one of part two has an incredible amount of meaning. Glad to be in the room listening to the conversation.
Thanks, Krause. We're blessed. We've got some great guests here today. Brian Turner, Damon Pennington, and Keith Gentes talking about something that is not just news. It is our lives. This is our America. And our president likes to talk about making America great until we fix what's going on in America, until we fix the systemic racism, until we fix the equality issues. America will never be great again. So while the president likes to use that moniker and gets cute with it, I will tell you, and it's no secret where my politics lie, we've got a long way to go before America's great. We've got to fix our system. During break, Damon, you and I were talking a little bit about your experience living in different areas. Let me flip it over to you. Talk about the different areas that you've lived in and what you've experienced from Gary to New Jersey to the West Coast.
I think most urban environments are pretty much very similar. They may talk a little different, the vernacular may be different, but they're pretty much the same. Whether it's Norfolk, Virginia, Compton, California, Gary, Indiana, Camden, they're all different. They may dress a little different, but they're all the same. But one of the common themes that I've always noticed, whether it's visiting people, no one ever trusts the police. They've never had a common relationship with the police. And I think it's funny because we keep talking about Camden, how it's changed. But one of the things I've always noticed, and I'll be 46 next week, is the common theme in urban environments is they didn't trust the police, either because of how the police treated them or just how it's been. And this has been generational. Going back to the 50s and 60s, they just didn't trust the police.
And what's crazy is, for the past 50 years, people believed that Brown versus Board of Education gave access to equal access in the schools, and that what Rosa Parks did changed things. Right. It did. She was a pioneer. We just didn't follow through as a society. Right. And we took those things and we minimalized those extreme efforts that people made to integrate, and it's like we dropped the ball. Right. We just left it hang out there. Keith, so corporate responsibility. We've talked over the past week about what we can do at Malamut & Associates beyond just using our words. And 2 days ago, we talked about our firm no longer uses Federal Express because we want to wait and see Federal Express's ownership of one of their employees. One of their employees' actions. Tell the listeners what happened.
Yeah, so right in our own backyard, we had an incident on Monday where, insofar as there was a peaceful demonstration down in Franklin Township on Delsey Drive, and a number of individuals, I don't know if the proper term is counter-protesters or whatnot, we'll leave it as counter-protesters, they decided to engage in some type of mocking display of the mechanical way, the means by which George Floyd was murdered. And, as the peaceful demonstrators were walking by, two gentlemen, one laying face down and one with the other gentleman with his knee on the other person's back, simulating the means by which Mr. Floyd was killed. Apparently they thought it was a good time, a good opportunity to mock a completely tragic incident. And there are consequences for actions, and you have to think somewhat of people's ability to use these smartphones, because we're capturing everything, and there's no more, hey, what happens behind closed doors, what's going on behind the closed curtains, because things are happening and things are getting captured. And I think that's really, what's driving this movement, is that you can't turn a blind eye to things that are just on, if it bleeds, it leads in the media, they say. So these videos are popping up all the time. But two of these individuals that were involved in this incident in Franklin Township, one of which works for FedEx, one of which I believe is an employee of the state of New Jersey in some capacity, Department of Corrections or something like that. FedEx has already come out and terminated the one individual. I believe the state of New Jersey has suspended the other individual for his role in the action. So it's something along the lines of something Spike Lee said over the weekend. I believe it was at the funeral. We have to pay attention to deeds, not words. The talking points are over. It doesn't matter. Thoughts and prayers. We're so tired of all that. You really need to make bold actions, bold decisions. And I think corporations are going to listen, because advertising dollars are going to be affected, and the consumer target groups, they're just not putting up with the blind eye anymore. They want to buy products, they want to use services for companies that are supporting these movements and not being an obstacle insofar as condoning or being complicit in this type of action by their employees. So I applaud FedEx for their move.
So Oprah Winfrey, who I don't know what her current estimated value is, but I can tell you it's probably a little bit more than everybody in the room here except for Krause. Oprah Winfrey was on a shopping trip in Switzerland. I usually go to the mall, but she went to Switzerland. And during her trip, she went into a designer handbag store, Hermès, and she wanted to see a bag. And the salesperson kept directing her attention to a different bag in the store. The bag that she wanted to see was $38,000. And at the time, Oprah's estimated net worth was $3 billion. This is systemic racism. Now, that's Switzerland. We can only work on our own house right now. We'll have to worry about working on Europe and other countries, other continents after we fix America. But that happens in America. My wife went to a luxury car dealership right down the street from our office and asked to test drive a car. And they told her that it was very expensive and that they only let people test drive them if they're going to buy them. I went to the same brand's dealership in Princeton and bought two of that car within a year of one another, because not only did my wife like the car, but I ended up liking it. I bought it. It happens. This systemic racism, which we're going to talk about in the fourth segment, and we're going to talk about significantly in the second portion of this show, which will air next week, is pervasive, and it knows no limits. People look at individuals walking into a store and decide right off the bat their ability to afford the merchandise in the store. And ironically, these are salespeople. These people make money off of selling you stuff.
I want to piggyback on what both of you gentlemen just mentioned. One of the things that we talk about when we talk about the civil rights movement, we talk about the marching. But for me, the biggest thing that you can really distinguish from the civil rights movement was not only Rosa Parks not sitting at the back of the bus. It's when they boycotted the bus company that's when it really affected the civil rights movement, because it hit their pockets. They realized how much black people rode their buses and how much money they were losing. That's when things started to change. It wasn't just about the marching. I think people talk about the marching so much, but I think, again, like you mentioned earlier, it's about the financial aspect. And when you start to affect people's pockets, that's when things start to really change.
And Brian, yes, our clients, they're consumers. They shop.
Yes.
To not give them the same respect or credibility, as a matter of fact, in some cases they shop more. To not give them the same respect and credibility and service as somebody who may look like me, not only is it a mistake for that establishment, but we're feeding it the more that we shop at those establishments, right?
You are correct, and it sort of ties back into what Keith was saying with respect to corporate responsibility. It happens because the corporations allow it to happen. There are massive amounts of complaints that are filed with these big chain stores, but they never actually get resolved because it's not a big deal to the actual corporation, because, as you said, they're going to continue to shop here.
So we're going to take a break in a second. When we come back, we're going to talk about systemic racism. Damon and I participated in a peaceful rally this past Sunday with some prolific young speakers, and I will tell you that I learned a lot, my family learned a lot, our children learned a lot. We'll talk about that when we come back.
That I want change, because like I talk to my mom every day, and she's like, that could have been your brother. That she keeps saying that could have been my son.
Real people, real perspectives, real opinion. Now back to Adam Malamut.
Welcome back again. I want to thank our guests, Brian Turner, Damon Pennington, and Keith Gentes. We've got a great show today. This is the first part of a two-part series on community can't happen without unity. Our objective here is to educate. We started off the show talking about George Floyd, Michael Brown, Freddie Gray, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Walter Scott, Brianna Taylor, Tanisha Anderson, Yvette Smith, Miriam Carey, Shelley Fry, Darnisha Harris, Melise Williams, Alicia Thomas, Chantel Davis, Rakia Boyd, Sharice Francis, Aim Stanley Jones, Tanika Wilson, 92-year-old Catherine Johnston, Alberta Sproul, and Kendra James. These people are victims of systemic racism, and so many more, so many more. We don't mean to disrespect those that we have not mentioned, but we've got to keep saying these people's names. We've got to keep their memories alive through affecting change. Damon, tell us about systemic racism in your mind.
Let me give you a great example. One of my favorite shows, Billions. 2 episodes ago, if you're not,
you're going to make me watch this show.
Show's awesome.
This is the third time in 3 days that you've told me about the show.
So there was an episode where Axelrod is trying to buy a bank. So there's a bank in the Buffalo area, and they wanted to prove that the bank wasn't giving out proper loans to people. So you had a black interracial couple go in and said the rate's going to be like 8.5%. He has a gay couple go in and says the rate's going to be like 7.5%. Then a white guy comes in, he's like, oh, your rate's going to be like 3.5%. I'm sorry. He said your rate's going to be like 3.5%. Now, some people sometimes I look at racism from a financial standpoint. And in that particular example, one person's rate's going to be this amount, the next person's rate's going to be another amount. And they're going to save a whole lot of money based on that. I look at redlining also, how you have areas that are deemed their insurance is going to be a lot more expensive because of who lives in that area, mostly minority or mostly people of color. Those are just 2 examples, just to give you an idea of how I look at systematic racism. You can look at education, how counselors will tell black kids, oh, you may not want to look at colleges, you may want to look at this, I think you may want to do this instead of going to colleges, where a white kid will come in the counselor's office right after them and say, let's look at state schools. Or it's little things like that people may not think are big deals, but they're definitely big deals. They impact kids a lot, people a lot.
Brian, what's your thoughts?
Well, as Damon was giving that example, I was thinking to myself how I could explain to the listeners that the types of racism that you see within institutions, as we've said, has been like a common theme here, are quote unquote acceptable. Institutional systematic racism is there because it mirrors a lack of society to condemn it. It's far more identifiable when you have institutional racism as opposed to a personal racist act. Now, a personal racist act, someone comes and they bomb a church, and black children are killed in that church. That racism hits you in your face, and it's there. That one singular act is there, and that community will revolve around that one singular act. What is more pervasive is the fact that the police departments in that township, the councilmen in that township, the neighborhoods that are in that township, those acts will only be addressed if those areas are also addressing the same problem. And it's kind of convoluted the way it works, but when the institutional racism takes hold, you can't really affect the personal side of that racism. I think I'm losing my train of thought.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. I get very emotional. I with this topic, and I apologize. I get very emotional. I lose my train of thought. What I'm essentially trying to state is that when you have these singular acts of racism, we know them, as Keith was saying, we see them. But the more pervasive problem is the racism that we don't see, because it affects a far larger scale of the population.
So the audience didn't have the opportunity to hear us talk before the show and in preparation for the show. And I think what you're getting at, one of the things that we talked about before the show is how somebody may say to you, man, I just got back from vacation. I'm even darker than you. That's racist.
That is racist.
Right? So that's the type of systemic racism that was discussed Sunday at the peaceful rally that we went to. And that's something that we're going to talk about in even greater detail in our next show, the second part of Community Can't Happen Without Unity. Keith, we see this in our personal injury practice all the time. We'll have adjusters that will, based on somebody's last name, jump to a conclusion as to whether they were at fault, whether they need the money, in air quotes, whether they need the money. What are you seeing on that side?
Just as you alluded to, I'll be on the phone with adjusters, and they'll make an offer, and it's an offer that's, so far beyond the actual value of the case, and the adjuster will say something in so far as, oh, well, that's a lot of money to Mr. Rodriguez, or that's a lot of money to Mr. Santos, or whatever the case may be, and it just blows my mind. Partly in part because at the initiation of the phone call, they're saying they're being recorded. I just can't believe a professional would speak like that while being recorded. But, even insofar as when clients come in, from certain geographic locations, we'll look at their auto insurance policies and seeing what they're paying for premiums based on, one car, minimal coverage, and they're paying $3,500 a year, where I'm paying, on two vehicles, living where I live, significantly lower, $1,500 less with $1 million of coverage. It's mind blowing. So that's just something that we have to fix. I don't know how. It's going to take a long time and a lot of effort, but it sounds like this may be the tipping point finally. I didn't envision that these rallies would still be going 3 weeks after the fact, and they are. And even more specifically, where some of the rallies are happening, in the suburbs and whatnot. And it seems that people are, not letting this moment pass by without participating.
Rallies are fine. Rallies are important. They bring people together. They give you a sense of what a real community is supposed to look like. They give you a sense of the number of people that are willing to stand up and be supportive, which I think that for so many years, people were afraid to stand up because they felt alone. These rallies create a platform for people to participate with their friends, their neighbors, their relatives. And That to me is fantastic. The problem is rallies don't create change. Rallies are like the appetizer. Rallies are like you take a couple bites out of it and now you've got to move on. So as we wrap this show up, I'm going to talk to you briefly about moving on. I want to talk to you about getting out and voting. We are less than 100 days, or right about less than 100 days now to the election day. And if you want to make America great again, get out and vote. No matter what your party affiliation is. If you're not part of the process, you're going to get the government you deserve. And right now, I can tell you that I don't believe that we deserve the government that we have. We're not going to make change just by voting. We've got to make change by social habits, patronizing businesses that support change and support social values that are in line with your social values. So with that being said, I'd like to thank our guests today, Keith Gentes, Bryan Turner, Damon Pennington. Next week, we'll hear from all these guests again. We'll talk about systemic racism. We'll talk about, again, additional changes that we can make to improve society. And we'll bring it back around to how important this issue really is in our everyday lives. Community can't happen without unity. Thank you for tuning in. Until next week, I'm Adam Malamut. Have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Adam Malamut Show, a Jacob Media production. If you're interested in learning more about the power of the radio hour, contact Joe Kraus at 267-261-3428.
This program is a paid commercial announcement and does not reflect the views of WPHT or its management. Today's program has been pre-recorded.